Sup?
What's up? Big week for news, guys.
Slow news day yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah, no doubt.
Well, we do have to send out a few thoughts and prayers probably before we get started. Some of the biggest stories of the week. Kim and Kanye, you know, you hate to see
What
it.
happened?
I was waiting for that one.
Wait a minute, they're breaking up?
Don't worry, Kim and Kanye will work it out.
Is that a real story?
It's true.
Really?
Okay, I
Wow,
thought
they're
you were
breaking
I mean,
making it up.
I think it's alleged true, but I didn't make it up this time.
Everyone's shopping,
that's
but wow.
Thoughts and prayers also go out to Jeff Bezos. Sad news for him.
Yeah, no longer the richest man in the world.
Really? Who took him over?
Elon Musk.
Elon.
Yeah.
Which is strange because I'm pretty sure like none of Elon Musk's companies have made like any money. Like I think it's all hypothetical.
Yeah, isn't SpaceX is probably generating some pretty lucrative speculations.
I think it was actually the Tesla stock went up 700% in a year or so.
Really?
Tesla, I think it
Despite
just,
Despite having basically no difference to the products of other automakers, as far as I can tell.
and
Again,
having released all the blueprints to like all their vehicles as like open source on the internet too. Well, not on the internet, but to those
And I
who know
think-
where to find them.
I think they're barely profitable now.
Well, we're still all looking for the electric revolution, but it just seems like the regular car manufacturers are stepping in for that. But hey, yay, Elon, good job. You
Well
won
done.
capitalism.
Yeah.
but of course, the biggest event of the week, the one that everyone's talking about, politics is in absolute turmoil. I don't know if I believe it, and I don't know if anyone else is going to believe what's happening up here, but it's in all the newspapers. The electorate is livid, of course. So here's what happened. I'll read a summary.
Yeah.
Rarely is a public outcry rooted in so many offensive elements, which are so easy to understand, yet so difficult to comprehend. There's the hypocrisy of politicians pledging solidarity with those in lonely isolation, even as they searched online to upgrade seats for family reunions. There's the raw deception of MPs, MLAs, and a senator pretending to be among us in pre-recorded Christmas greetings when they knew they'd be slathering on sunscreen at the swim-up bar by the time it was released.
My God.
Can you believe
Jesus.
this?
How dare they go on vacation?
Yeah.
Can you seriously imagine? So we are, of course, talking about the disgusting, cancerous Canadian politicians who left to go on vacation while they were supposed to be isolating in COVID.
I feel like this is a fascist coup of my health and well-being.
Yeah. They're kicking back in Hawaii and other colonial holdings while I'm stuck here.
What kind of fucking blows my mind about it is they had to know that somebody was going to figure this out eventually and that it was going to look really, really bad. Like, it's hard to hide those kind of things at this point. And apparently some of them even had pictures of them floating around online, on vacation. And I'm like, what, did you not think that maybe it'd be better not to fucking, like, jump into that shot?
Hello, you are on the Pill Pod, and we are Canadian. Proudly Canadian, that's TBD. We know America's on fire, and we're going to get there, but the big news in Canada this week is that politicians pre-recorded messages encouraging citizens, the electorate, to stay home for Christmas while they went to Cancun. And some of them are still
what?
hiding down. Some of them are hiding down there.
Like Mexico and stuff, they're hiding.
Wait, did something happen in the States?
Oh, didn't you see the fire?
I don't actually pay attention. No, what fire?
The Kanye news or the other news?
I have a south-facing window, so I can see there's a little bit of smoke rising.
He said America was on fire. What do you mean it's on fire?
Go stand on your back porch.
Well, Canada got the smoke from California. Maybe that's it. There's a little bit of forest fire fumes coming up our way. It's nice, though. I didn't have to smoke as much weed while that was happening. Sorry, that's not who we are. I don't represent everybody on this pod.
I don't think anyone represents anyone on this pod, and we may disagree on the significance of this event.
Deep.
But
Yeah,
there
obviously
shall
we
be
know what
no
this event is.
coups of the podcast.
Or coups of my health and well-being.
Coup d'etat.
Anyway, hey, I get it. What a perfect end to Trumpism. We can call it an end. I don't think there's anyone to don the mantle of the gaping hole he's going to leave in the politics of our neighbors to the south. I guess that does depend on where he spends his twilight years.
Mar-a-Lago.
I'm excited for the new disciplines this is going to open up in this year. Trumpology, Trumponomy, Trumponometrics.
Coupism.
Trump studies, yeah.
Poli sci departments are going to be rolling in it.
It's going to be a new subfield in my political science department. It'll be the 6th one. Trump studies.
Trump studies.
How to perform a Trumpectomy.
I was thinking about all the poor video game designers and showrunners who are going to have to come up with plots as stupid as this for their... This should be the plot of Assassin's Creed, not the Napoleon's coup, but the cow shaman coup.
Yeah, I remember the South Park creators were just said they're not even going to do anything on Trump because he just like deconstructs himself.
I'm actually wondering who's going to play him in a biopic 10 years from now, because you know perfectly well, like the Oliver Stone of the next decade or something is going to see this as a perfect Oscar bait. And I was like, well, they were able to pull W off, and then they were able to also pull like Barack Obama off. But who can they possibly get to play Trump?
Yeah.
You know what you should actually see? There's a miniseries, a 2-part miniseries called The Comey Rule. Trump is played by Brendan Gleeson.
Yes, I remember you telling me about that. Yeah. I can see that
His performance
working.
is actually quite good. It's impressively good, because I think pulling off a Trump, you have to really toe the line and somehow like avoid being a caricature when Trump himself is a caricature. So it's like, how do you play somebody without it just seeming like the Alec Baldwin, like hilarious?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about it. It's going to be really difficult to step out of Baldwin's shadow since he gave such a definitive take on the character.
I'll send you a video actually of Gleason doing it. It's pretty impressive. He gets the head tilt and the breaths really well. Like, I don't know if you guys ever notice how Trump has this weird way of breathing where he'll kind of be like, it's disgraceful, and he'll like breathe in as he's talking and tilt his head. I don't know if you guys, there's a very distinct breathing pattern that Trump has that this actor captures very well.
It's that McNugget sauce that's just blocking up his airways.
Maybe we can find like a cousin or something to play him, maybe like back when Larry David did Bernie Sanders. That was pretty on point.
Yeah.
We'll need somebody like that. I think Shy the Beef is going that direction. If he just carries on for another 10 years, he'll look like Trump. He'll be Trumpish.
Just get Kanye to play him. You know, that can be his Oscar role.
Yeah, hopefully that's within his range.
All right, I don't know where we all are on this event. I think we probably disagree.
Well,
but...
can I just say I loved to some extent I liked it. Not like because I was happy that it happened, but in the sense that I think a lot of these like Trump, stop the steal, their kind of whole motivation was somehow sustained by a fantasy of like we're going to do this, we're going to overcome all this. And I think there's something kind of satisfying about watching them like storm it. It's like, what are you going to do? And then they storm it, and then it's like nothing happens. And if anything, it had like a very damaging effect. It was kind of like a splash of cold water.
Au contraire, though, they got in there.
What do now?
They got in there, and their purpose, evidently, was to take selfies of themselves having got in there.
Sure. Okay. No, but hold on. So I think like there's the point that Zizek makes a lot about like the sort of role that Lost Causes has in our fantasy. Like if we never get to attempt something, it's like it stays alive more. So to some extent, I think that like the fact that they got into the Capitol and then nothing happens, it kind of interrupts the ability for that fantasy to be sustained, where they can be like, well, if only we would have tried, we could have done something. And it's like, well, you got into the Capitol and like splash cold water on like your little like jouissance of I don't know, imagining what could have been possible.
He references Lacan and this notion of the two deaths as a kind of metaphor for what happens. Where he says if you look at various Lacan says if you look at various figures following Hegel throughout history, people like Napoleon, sometimes you're dead, but you're not really cognizant yet of the fact that you're dead. So of course Napoleon was utterly defeated, in the War of the Sixth Coalition, but then he managed to stage what he thought was a comeback for 100 days before, it all ended catastrophically with the Battle of Waterloo, and he was shipped to an even crappier island where he died. And it does seem, I agree with Victor in some senses, like this follows the same structure where it was pretty clear that Trumpism had been dealt a mortal blow when he lost the election, especially since so much of Trump's brand is associated with winning and overcoming and beating the odds. But rather than acknowledge that, it kind of limped onwards. And now there was this attempt at some kind of revolutionary outrage or revolutionary rupture to restore him to power. But it all just ended up coming across as extraordinarily banal and kind of impotent, and demonstrating that no, Trumpism really is dead. Right? Or
Yeah, if
not,
anything, it's the
not
death
dead as a
blow.
movement, but as an administration and as a government, at least for now.
Yeah, what was that quote Lenin attributes to Napoleon? He might not have said it, but it was something like jump into the fray and then decide what to do. I think that's what we saw yesterday.
Yeah.
That is the 6th.
Except the Napoleons, plural, were pretty good at coups.
They
They have
were.
what? They have 3 successful coups between them.
Yeah, I mean, this wasn't a coup, obviously.
Well, but I mean, this actually demonstrates why it is that Trump is really not a particularly skilled political actor. And a lot of people have pointed this out. I think Corey Robin is the most successful of them, right? But, you know, he's postured as a political genius because he kind of beat the odds and won the 2016 election, and before that run the Republican nomination. But it's worth noting that he did so under very circumscribed conditions and by very narrow margins. And since then, he's remained tremendously unpopular. He wasn't able to expand his base. Despite the fact that the Republicans had all 3 branches of government, he wasn't even able to push through any major piece of legislation. And then he lost the second election, and it looks like he lost pretty much every elected branch of government that's available to the Republicans.
But isn't this tragic for the followers, these pig men, one of whom got shot for him, and they don't want anything. They just want him or their image of him to look down, shining upon them. And he's the one who says, we're going down to the Capitol. I'll be with you. And then he just sits and watches them on TV while they're hooting, hollering, doughy, hog brain,
But he
breaking
loved
into
it.
doors.
That's what he wanted.
Yeah. But that's
He
what I'm
wanted.
saying.
It was all narcissistic. He just wanted like that's why he had such a hard time condemning them, because the fact that he knew all of those people in the Capitol were there because they fucking love him so much, that is irresistible to him. So he couldn't help himself. He couldn't help himself and condemn them, because he's like, how in his mind he's like, how could I condemn people who love me this much? It's like that's all he wants, right? All his main modus operandi is like getting people to love him. He doesn't care about politics really.
And this is what I was getting at. Like successful coups throughout history, and you get the guy like the Bolshevik Revolution against the February government in 1917, and then a number of others, take a lot of work, and they also require intense focus on detail, because really you have to be able to pull off what's the equivalent of a political magic trick, where you swap out the one government and then replace it so quickly that it's almost like nobody really knows what happened. And by the time your enemies kind of realize what's going on, you've already kind of changed the status quo. Trump didn't do anything that was necessary to actually kind of solidify that kind of possibility by, for instance, reaching out to the military or the police to try to make sure that they would give him a carte blanche to do whatever he wanted.
all these no institutional organizing
exactly.
at all.
He didn't have any kind of institutional allies, exactly right, in any of the major administrations of the U.S. government. All that he really had, as Victor pointed out, was this mob of people who loved him. And it's not surprising that he didn't really think to expand beyond that, since that's pretty much who he is, right? He's
And that's all
a
he wants.
narcissist who feeds off of his base and their reverence for him. All the other stuff takes too much work and involves actually making the kind of, oddly enough, the deals that he defined himself on for a little while, but which actually make up so much of political life, in which he's proven really incompetent.
So failing grade on the insurrectionary report card, and the first president who hasn't been assassinated that only served one term. I don't think there's really any other president, barring like extenuating circumstances, that only served one term. They all served a second.
Bush
No, there
served
were a
one.
few. Yeah, Bush the
Bush
first
Senior.
one. And then there was Carter also recently.
And Carter was in the 80 and he only served one term and he got beat by Reagan.
Which is a shame, because I actually like Carter quite a bit. But
Anyway, we got 4 deaths. 1 was gunshot related. 3 were fast food related.
I didn't know
Allegedly.
what the other deaths, the 3 deaths
I think
were.
one guy
Fast food?
tasered himself. I at least thought that might have been a Twitter
What?
joke. We'll just say 3 of them were fast food related, but at least they all died happy serving their god emperor. the God Emperor of their Facebook.
Trump, yeah.
This was a live Facebook event.
It was a I agree it was a spectacle too, but I think the story to me isn't so much that this was a coup. I mean, obviously it wasn't a coup. It had none of the institutional markings of a coup. It was more a story of the sort of psychological impact that conspiracy theories can have on people, that like alternative media, that like YouTubers, and that having a president stoke those flames and create like fear, uncertainty, and doubt in people that matches their own predisposed political biases, their love for Trump. You put all those things together with like the modern media landscape, and this spectacle is what you get from it.
Yeah, and that's why I actually take this more significantly than I think you might pills. And it's because even Trump himself is pretty incompetent, right? And I think we were both pointing this out. He neither possessed the kind of tactical acumen or really the patience to pull off something that would genuinely resemble a coup, right? All he was able to do was rile up his base, kind of sick them on his political opponents, and then it all broke like waves on a rock, right? But it doesn't mean that somebody can't embody a kind of Trumpist postmodern approach to politics and do so a lot more effectively and with much more tactical acumen and political sensibilities than Donald Trump, right? And I think actually what we saw just before this happened was a couple of heirs apparent trying to do just that. Somebody like Ted Cruz, right, who is genuinely a pretty smart guy, seemed kind of desperate to seize the Trumpist mantle for himself by continuing to propagate these false stories that the election had been stolen, arguing that VP Pence should disqualify certain electors, all that kind of stuff, right? So that's what really worries me about the future, especially given Trump's age and the unlikelihood of him having enough political capital to run again in, I guess, 2024.
All right. Well, I'll introduce some points for debate, at least.
Hang on. There's one last detail that nobody's talking about. There are explosive devices found at both the RNC and the DNC headquarters.
Oh, I didn't know
which were successfully, safely detonated. But I mean, nobody's talking about that shit. That seems pretty significant to me.
Talk about it, Eric.
Well, I'm talking about the lack of coverage.
Right. I mean, it's true that wasn't like covered, but I mean, I guess would that add more to the argument that this was a coup attempt, or it just like more mischief? I mean, the people literally, like mischief. Most of these people literally thought that this election was stolen. Like most of them actually believe that in their heart of hearts, and that's a dangerous combination of beliefs, like with the whole media landscape. And I want to make a prediction right now that I hope doesn't come true, but I think will, is I think that during Biden's presidency you're going to see a domestic terrorist attack similar to the Oklahoma City bombing.
Yeah, and that's what worries me about the future also. Like I was saying before, I think that the kind of comparisons to the Beer Putsch are actually really overstated, because that was actually carried off with a lot more success, at least for a little while, than what we saw here, in part because the Nazis did actually try to coordinate with major sectors of German society and try to get the military on their side, and were actually able to seize control of Munich for a brief period of time, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But later on, they did actually seize power legitimately, because the energy of their movement wasn't really dissipated. It was actually vitalized by the fact that they almost successfully pulled this off, at least for a few days. And then, the German authorities went soft on them because a lot of people were nationalists and sympathized with what they were trying to do, right? What worries me is that this might be the end of Trump and his administration, and I think there's no question it will be, since he's losing a lot of political allies. But I'm not sure that this will be the end of Trumpism or postmodern conservatism or neo-fascism or traditionalism, whatever you want to call it, right? I think that it might actually have a long future ahead of it, and I really worry about what will happen if somebody a lot more competent and a lot more ruthless seizes the mantle of this kind of outlook.
Well, my point number one was media fear-mongering, and now you're doing it for us. So we have both sides represented.
It is concerning, though.
It's concerning for you.
Yeah, push back on it.
I'm not concerned at all. But I wanted to at least introduce a point that we can debate, which is 100% to me, this is a pseudo-event. A pseudo-event is images taken out of the consequence versus cause we would see in normal political action in history. So I'm taking the side that this is an image that will have probably no consequences. I'll defend that. And the image is the perfect image to me is this cow, the cowhead guy sitting at the chair at the head
I
of
love
the
him.
legislature. And should we not expect that the head of the legislature was always a person wearing a cow head? Anyway, so yeah, the blue check Twitter is freaking out, calling them terrorists, calling them Nazis, making the comparisons with the beer hall pooch. Very funny to me. And to me, that shows a lack of imagination that journalists have, because anytime they see a threat to democracy, it's the Nazi comparison. Immediately, Current Affairs did it, the one that you just mentioned. And yeah, I would hope that we can have a better sense of imagination, particularly because of what we said a few weeks ago. There's no one committed enough to be a fascist. And the people that are committed enough to be fascists have almost no effect on American politics, where all of the power is still exactly where the power was before this all happened, which is why I say that it's completely inconsequential. It's the parties and the donors, not the cow guy, that is the enemy.
Well, I think that, I guess, to just say, well, this is just an image, this is just a spectacle. I mean, I think that those things can have a huge influence on people's minds, and I think yesterday we saw, a proof of that. I think, because I do think that these people were motivated by spectacle, by like these ridiculous images of things, of ideas. I guess maybe in that case they're not images, or like the belief in that the election was stolen. But in any case, like, I don't think it's inconsequential. Like, I certainly wouldn't write it off, but I agree that the media is very quick and hasty because they don't understand the alternative media like landscape. They don't understand YouTube very well. So I think when they see something like this happen, they do jump to these, pretty like simplistic takes, and they get very alarmist, I suppose. So I don't disagree that the media's reaction to it, but I also agree with Matt that this spectacle is going to have an impact on people. I'm already seeing like a lot of these kind of more white nationalist or not white nationalist, but traditionalist far right, Trumper people on Twitter talking about how they want to burn the Republican Party down, and they're celebrating. And after they're seeing like Lindsey Graham and all these people quickly turn their backs. And by the way, as an aside, Jesus, Lindsey Graham, I don't know if any of you guys saw his speech, but holy fuck, did that guy do a 180 quickly? Like after he won his Senate seat narrowly in South Carolina, he was like, "I'm going to fight with you to the end, Trump." And then on the floor of the Senate, like yesterday or this morning or something, I saw him in almost like restrained jubilation, so happy to be like totally turning his back and being like, yeah, we're not going to do this. Like, we were never going to do this. It's like, what the fuck? Like, holy shit, this guy is like a rat escaping a sinking ship as quickly as possible.
Instantly, like, I don't agree with what you're saying, but I'll defend to the death your right to say it. And that's their sort of fallback position. But
also stoked the fears of a stolen election for so long, and then now it's like he never did it. He's like totally did a 180.
Yeah.
But I do think
this speaks to. I just want to respond directly to that, because when I say consequential, it definitely has to do with institutional power and decisions that are made by legislative bodies that actually affect individuals. And on that ground, I think that Trumpism is less effective today than it was 2 days ago, because now the whole institution is saying, no, we have a firewall. I'm not saying that some psycho is not going to blow up a building in the future, but that's always a threat, right? That threat might be marginally increased or not.
I think it's more than
even an event like that.
Yeah, I'm going to split the difference.
Even a threat like that, though, is not different from 3 days ago. But
or under Obama.
The institutions have very much drawn a firewall saying, we are not that, we condemn that. Even the ones that were flirting with it, like you just said, a few days ago, now like that is definitely fringe. It's been pushed to the fringe.
Yeah, I'm going to split the difference between these two and say that I think there are two reasons why we need to be more concerned than Pils is allowing, while still acknowledging that I think everyone's right that Trumpism is certainly less effective now than it was even yesterday, in part because of this event. And in this sense, it's less something to catastrophize and more something to recognize as I would think, almost the death throes of at least this administration. And the two things that I wanted to point out, which are reasons for concern, is that this doesn't really represent a dramatic shift in the way that the GOP has actually approached politics. I would actually say that the deer man that you saw on the Senate floor is actually the way GOP politics have been moving for a very long time, at least since the 1980s. And you could talk about the emergence of people like Rush Limbaugh. You can talk about Newt Gingrich and his hyperpartisanship and the contract with America. You can talk about the attempt to essentially impeach Clinton over the blowjob.
Alex Jones and the InfoWars.
Alex
That's
Jones,
where they get it all from.
Yeah, the Bush administration talking about how it is that we create our own reality now, and then all the kind of postmodern politics that you see associated with Trumpism, right? And it's unreality, it's fake news, it's highly identitarian orientation, Breitbart, you name it, right? And none of that is going to go away just because this event, if you want to call it that, is delegitimated.
Yeah, this is a full-blown subculture we're dealing with.
Exactly.
And in our hyper-connected digital world, now these people find each other. It's just like, it reminds me of the flat earthers, right? Like those people who, they have their own conferences, they have their own events, people meet their freaking wives and husbands at these things, and like, it's a community. It's a whole subculture. And
did you guys
can't
actually
just
see
stamp
that
something like that out?
There was an
I saw
opinion
this-
poll.
sorry,
It was
go ahead.
45% of Republicans thought that storming the Capitol was justified and a good idea.
Yeah, and this is what I'm saying. Like, certainly this has been a slap in the wrist. Not a slap in the wrist. It's a pretty big condemnation of Trumpism that even senior members of the
wake-up
GOP
call.
who were allies of Trump are now turning against him. But whether or not that's actually going to shift the direction of American conservatism, I think, is a much more open question. And the second thing is that I agree with you that there's this kind of spectral quality to what went on, in the sense that materially and institutionally it's not shifted all that much. But what I think that, following Baudrillard, what you really see is precisely that what we're seeing in the 21st century is the subordination of the reality principle to hyper-reality, right? Where the image of politics has now become what politics is. And it's not connected to anything that's more substantial than that. Trump has flourished in this kind of environment. And even if he himself goes or is canceled or people tire of his particular shtick, somebody else might very well come along and be able to embody the same qualities. Maybe even somebody who's younger and more competent with the kind of media and subcultures that a lot of these
Don
people
Jr.
thrive in. Yeah, Don Jr., right? Or someone. And so that's what concerns me, because I do think that this is an epochal shift or a cultural shift, if you want, that we're not going to get away from, which also contributes to exacerbating a lot of the tendencies that we've seen in American conservatism for a long time, since I think it thrives precisely in this kind of hyper-real, highly narrativized environment. And also, I should say, just as a comment on Eric, this was a funny thing. I saw this website the other day where conservatives now don't want to live near liberals. So they actually are creating websites online where you can try to buy a house in a conservative neighborhood. And the aim is to essentially funnel you into what are really safe spaces by any other name, right? While you'll be in the same neighborhood with other people. And I was watching an interview with the guy who was organizing this website, and he said, like, look, I just think that good fences make good neighbors, and not having any liberals around tends to make me happy. So,
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, this has really become a mode of life,
Conservative ethno-state. I see your Baudrillard, and I raise you de Boer, who said something like, a democracy loves to have an incomprehensible enemy, like terrorism, I don't know, maybe COVID. Agamben would probably suggest that. But now there's this latent fear that is propagated, and the latent fear is for whatever this is, Trumpism. I don't know what it's going to be called after that. But then the institution can allow everyone to convince themselves that compared to terrorism, what you have is really good, so nothing will be changed. So we talked about Agamben once on this podcast way back, who said that COVID was going to be a state of exception. I think we all disagreed and dismissed that. But if there's a fear that I would have out of this, and fearmonger, I would fearmonger that this state of exception is going to be used to the full extent that it can be to justify any manner of state interventions and that kind of repression of otherwise or freedoms that we would have had now.
Yeah, and I would say that that's actually the wrong way to approach this. And one of the reasons is that Trumpism has thrived in an atmosphere where people feel that their political institutions are delegitimated because they only serve elite interests. And I don't think that's just true of Trump. You also saw similar animosities provoking things like Brexit or the turn to law and justice in Poland, you name it. And what I think we need right now is a process of democratic renewal to allow people to feel that their institutions reflect their actual wishes rather than doubling down on elite-driven technocracy in the name of security or whatever it happens to be. So that's what I take away from it, Kevin. But anyway.
I mean, I do also think that right now there's a real opportunity. I mean, the Democrats also won, which I think is forgotten. They won both Senate seats, so now the Democrats have control of all branches of government. And I do think that there's probably real motivation to pass things like healthcare and the $2,000 stimulus and all these other things, which is it. I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting with the MAGA crowd, the MAGA cult, is that there is an underlying economically left-wing populist element to it, which is kind of interesting. And Trump was pushing the $2,000. So I wonder whether or not there's an opportunity here for the Democrats to pass some things that will make that MAGA like economically left-wing populist aspect happy, or I don't know, pacify them a little bit by giving them health care, giving them $2,000.
They don't want to. They already won. Now that the fascists, quote unquote, tried to take over the legislatures, they don't have to do anything for 4 years, which is what that De Boer quote that I mentioned is kind of saying. They don't have to do anything anymore because they can say, at least we're not that.
Well, I actually disagree. I do think that there's a momentum in the Democratic Party to pass those things.
I hope that history proves me wrong.
I'll say a more complication here, because what Pilly Boy is saying is on track. I think is that.
Well, I hope that doesn't stick.
Remember that MAGA and this wave of far right people like Trump did not cause this, right? This is something that Cornel West brings up, is that this movement of the far right began under Obama. It began under the Democrats. So the Democrats are just as much to blame for this whole situation as the Republicans. And that's why the fact that Trump is going down in flames really doesn't give me any fucking comfort whatsoever. Because now we have Mr. Joe Biden, the fucking king of the milquetoast presidents, coming into office. And what's he going to do? He's just going to resume a kind of Obama program where it's all right, let's switch Republican donors out for big corporate Democrat donors, and nothing's going to be any different. And the same social issues that caused this sort of unrest are just going to exacerbate further unless there is a real, actual change in the Democratic Party, a good sign of which would be for them to accept something like a Green New Deal or some other more radical kind of platform like that, rather than just moving back to this sort of safe democratic politics, because everyone said that's the problem in the first place. Conservatives and Democrats, they're all liberals. They're just a little bit different side of the same fucking spectrum. They're all the same in the end. And we're just switching out one for another, the puppet on the left and the puppet on the right, and basically the same person holds both puppets. And it's all that's why I disagree
to some extent,
with,
I think
the idea that Trump is sort of this is a big turning point. No, it's not. Give me a fucking break.
I mean, I think you're right that that I don't think there's going to be some radical shifts. You need something. I mean, you need to change the entire system of government in the states. I mean, I agree to some extent. I do think that we're going to see these what are pretty moderate things. The things I mentioned are not revolutionary, right? Just having a public option, the $2,000 stimulus, a couple other things. That's not radical change at all. That's just oh yeah, exactly. A lot of other countries have gotten a lot more, but I don't think the reason for that alone is because of part of the reason for that though is also the institutional factor. Even though the Democrats won the Senate, they don't have a they need 60 votes to pass a filibuster. So even now, it's not possible. I think a lot of lefties are going to start getting mad at Biden for not doing more. But even if he wanted to do more, even if he wanted to do literally everything that Bernie wanted to do, there are a bunch of institutional and also party factors. One being Joe Manchin, who's a moderate Democrat, who is already on record saying he will not support a Green New Deal. He will not support, right? So there's just so many factors in play that you can't just blame Biden for. I'm sure Biden's happy about it, but I'm just saying there's like a bunch of other factors that
like
just have nothing to
structural
do
and
with
procedural
like
things,
even if
right?
like factors that would exist if Bernie Sanders was president right now in the same conditions, the same barriers would exist, and he would have just as much chance of passing the things that he wanted.
Yeah,
as
well,
Biden
a
does.
bill to abolish the filibuster in the great cosmic irony would probably get filibustered.
Yeah. Well, I know this is one of the problems, right? And I think Victor is exactly right. And people have talked about how it is that during the 1930s through the 1950s, because there was a kind of overlapping consensus around a kind of moderate social welfareism, and the two parties were less polarized on many issues, it was actually possible to pursue a pretty ambitious legislative agenda. And you saw people like FDR do that. You saw people like, excuse me, Lyndon Johnson do that. You even saw people like Reagan do that up through the. But it's because the two parties have become extremely polarized. It's very, very difficult to get anyone to shift on their positions. And I think that this might not be a problem in a purely majoritarian legislative setting, where all you need is 50% plus one. But the problem is that the United States is designed. The American Constitution is designed to be extremely resistant to change and extremely resistant to any ambitious legislative efforts unless there's broad bipartisan consent to them. And for that reason, you've seen legislative gridlock on virtually any kind of substantive measures for the past, 30 years now or so. If you look at the legislative achievements of somebody like Clinton, they're pretty minimal. Bush actually wasn't able to really do all that much except enact a bunch of tax cuts. At the domestic level.
I mean, Clinton did cause the Asian market collapse, but
no, I'm
set
talking
that
about,
aside.
I'm talking about domestic legislative.
Yeah. Okay.
Well, this is one of the things. One of the few powers that really is quite substantial is the executive power over foreign affairs that's vested in the office of the president, right?
Yeah.
But if you look at Obama, his signature achievement, right, the Affordable Care Act, that only came after he won a massive sweeping victory in all the elected branches of government, and really had to struggle to push through the Affordable Care Act, which was only the result of just hamstringing compromises with the moderate Democrats and GOP members who might be willing to sign on to some provisions. And then Trump's only legislative accomplishment, again, more tax cuts, right? And I think people are really sick of this and really tired of it, but it's very difficult for the reasons that Victor was pointing out and a lot of others to see how that could fundamentally change without big institutional changes.
Well, that's why I always get frustrated with the online left or, the Bernie or bust, because I'm always like, okay, like that's premised on your own misunderstanding of how the American political system works. It doesn't really matter if Bernie was president or not. So many other things have to be in place.
He would make a difference to the extent possible, right? And it would push a more left agenda.
I mean, he would make a rhetorical difference, but he wouldn't make a difference in the Senate. He wouldn't make a difference in the House of Representatives. It would just be like symbolic, but then he wouldn't be able to get anything done. Like, you would need the House and the Senate to be democratic socialists. That's what, so you would literally need everybody to be.
I don't know why you're saying that these parties are polarized either. That's exactly the opposite of what Eric just said. He said they're both serving the same interest, which is 100% what I agree with.
Yeah, but
and what you're saying that they just don't do anything, that's the success of the system. It's designed not to do anything except for the donors that are the same for both parties. Whether or not you give tax cuts.
Yeah, they're culturally polarized by hyperpartisanship. I mean, this is the thing. If you look at the way that conservatives speak about back up through the 1980s, people were willing to sometimes agree that the other side, the other political party, had something of value to offer, right?
But this is rhetorical. This is not. It has not since the 70s fundamentally shift any change of wealth, any distribution of wealth, except who has it, and it goes up all the time.
Well, no, I actually think that misapprehends how it is that the U.S. political system works, right? There is real polarization in the United States between people like democratic socialists who really do want to pursue a radical agenda and things like social conservative capitalists who want exactly the opposite. The reason why
no democratic socialist agenda has ever been advanced since at least the
okay, but
early
this is what
50s.
I'm getting at, right? The reason why it is that you see very little difference in how the actual parties engage in governance isn't because there's no real polarization in the population. It's because there's dramatic polarization in the population, which means that the two parties tend to pursue what's sometimes called the median voter, right? the most average person right in the middle, who's not going to have any views that are going to offend anyone, because you're fighting for very thin margins when it comes to any election, right? So it's actually a consequence of the partisanship that you see in the United States, like in American culture, that there's so little difference in the actual policies the party pursues, because none of the parties are actually willing to pursue a radical agenda that will upset the few people in the middle who might be willing to shift their opinion, right?
So there's a problem with the representation of a representative democracy, but that's exactly the same thing as I'm saying. The system's working like it should for the people that are paying for it.
I think I agree that it's the same thing to say that they're completely different as to say that they're the same and there is no difference when you draw a really hard line around politics and you don't look at the extra political factors that influence this. Like, sure, things didn't change since the 70s, except the internet, social media, world economic relations, like everything other than politics has basically changed. And now we're looking at drawing a circle around politics and looking at politics to figure out, well, what the hell is happening? And nobody's looking outside. Nobody's looking at, say, what's the role? Well, people are looking at this. What's the role in Facebook in destabilizing this? What's the role in new geopolitical configurations that have emerged in the past decade or two and their influence on American politics? Like, American politics is not happening in a vacuum. But so your assessment is great insofar as it is siloed in a purely political, economic view of the states. But when you start factoring in all these
That's
other
exactly
things,
the opposite of what I said, though. I said wealth distribution is the only thing that's changed about politics.
well, wealth distribution has, like, it improved after World War II. It was more distributed, and then since
I
the
said
80s,
since the 70s.
So yeah,
wealth has only moved up.
I'm just stretching back a bit further than since the neoliberal revolutions in the 70s and 80s, the wealth gap has slowly gotten worse again. Okay, that's a huge factor in all of this. But some of the other ways that we do politics today and that we learn about things, you talk about this as a spectacle. Well, what is the spectacle? What is carrying these images, right? Like in the old analog days, we'd all be reading about this morning with our corncob pipes and our rocking chairs out on our decks when the boy throws the newspaper onto the balcony. But now we have this phenomenon called instant explanation. I think it's something like Benjamin was saying this back in the day. An event barely is even allowed to take place before it is explained to death and spun in 1,000 different directions. And that's why we're never going to get to the truth behind any of this. Everyone's going to be glued to their streams and their image sources and their media bubbles. And everyone's going to be looking at it through these separate lenses, where what we need to do is maybe broaden our scope a little bit and try to look outside politics and purely economic causes, right? Or else we're just being determinists about it.
Yeah, and this is kind of what I was trying to get at, right? That in the kind of earlier era of print media that you saw existing through the late 19th century up until about the late 20th century, right? It was possible for people to consume relatively complex media that would expose them to a wide variety of alternate viewpoints, and for them to just view that as normal and part of the community that they lived in, right? You could pick up a newspaper, and it would usually have a polemical point, but you would usually at least get exposure to a few different socialist views, left-wing views, right-wing views, et cetera, et cetera. And what you've seen right now with political stratification is people entering into their silos and hearing nothing really of substance about the other side, aside from the fact that they're wrong about everything. And the interesting thing about this is there really is deep political and cultural disagreements in the United States over virtually everything, right? A democratic socialist on the far left who wants trans rights for all, weed and every other drug completely legalized, and a vast welfare state and worker ownership, the means of production, has a very different outlook on what society should look like than a Christian libertarian who thinks that guns, Jesus, and capital are what should make the world go around. Right?
I guess what I want to ask then is where would all this disagreement have come from? Because when we hear like Zizek talk about Bernie Sanders saying that in the 60s, a lot of Bernie Sanders platforms were like the general consensus platforms, whereas today Bernie Sanders' platform is extremely divisive and only appreciated by people on the far left or the real left. and it's a divisive issue. So where did this division come from? And yes, like economic disparity is a huge cause behind it, but where else did it come from? You can't just sort of use political division to explain why there's political division. That's like a tautology.
And if I may just tack on to that point, what you're calling politics is what you're saying ordinary people believe, which is absolutely not what I'm calling politics, because what they believe has no recognizable effect on the way that power shifts or that a country is governed, as evinced by the last 40 years.
Well, but this is what I'm saying it does, right? And it's precisely because the United States is so polarized culturally, along the parameters that we've been discussing.
Yeah, but that's why it's working. Why is it polarized? Like Eric just said, the Southern strategy. That's why it's polarized.
Yeah, but this is what I'm trying to explain, right? That because there's mass polarization on the part of the American society, right? You have two political parties because the institutions are designed to produce a two-party system, right? Who have very little interest in chasing after what they consider to be fringe views, right? Because they know perfectly well that they have their supporters, and most of the people on the fringe are going to align with them no matter what, right? Bernie Sanders supporters are never going to break from the Democratic Party because the only alternative then is something like Donald Trump, right? This means that the kind of people that both parties tend to pursue are the median voters, right? The people who exist in the middle and who have very innocuous views. And that tends to keep politics moving on a relatively unambitious, straight and narrow course.
Yeah, maybe that tells me a little bit that the moderate voter is an abstraction and doesn't really exist, just like Obama's middle class. It doesn't really exist. It's just an abstraction, and you don't really need to appeal to them at all because it doesn't make a difference because they're not fucking there because they're just a number in a poll.
Well, it's true. So back up pills too. Like I think what you were saying is that what the average person thinks has no impact, and it's actually interesting. There's when I was studying like comparative politics, it's like the political science research on American politics has a very strong consensus. All the evidence shows pretty much that like a random citizen's policy preference has almost no impact on what policies are chosen.
Yeah.
In fact, like there's the relationship is almost I remember the quote was something like in the abstract was something like, the relationship is so weak that it may as well not exist.
Yeah.
Like between between like policy preference of the voter and what policies are actually enacted by the government. And they have all other reasons, which are like institutional reasons, like private interests, like special interests, like having a much stronger relationship.
I wonder what that scale is relative to corporate donors. But that's exactly my point. You're saying nothing happens because they're appealing to a middle. And I'm saying, like, you're over determining the effect by not just saying money dominates the system, money gets decisions made, not voters.
Well, I think that the two things are fundamentally related, right? I mean, what you have in most U.S. elections is, again, two parties in which there are many fringe views, right, competing for a small minority of voters who might change their mind in certain swing states, right? And so it requires unbelievable amounts of money to try to target those voters and get them to shift one way or another, right? But because...
What do you mean? Oh, explain that. Get them to shift.
Well, I mean, you can think about voters in Florida. You can think about voters in Ohio. You can think about...
What is the specific mechanism by which they get convinced?
Convince them with commercials and shit.
Well, this is what I'm saying. It's usually by being targeted by...
That's what I was looking for.
Yes, exactly. But this highly specified...
But also, it's also important... It's also important to disentangle like a citizen's random policy preference when you ask them like what they want to happen and their allegiance to a party too, because there's tons of people who citizens are totally inconsistent and incoherent with their beliefs. Like you ask them like, do you want like healthcare or whatever? And then depending on how you ask the question, they'll say yes or no. Like that's why Brianna Joy Gray and like all these other cringy leftists, they often say like, oh, like the public supports a Green New Deal, but like that's based on some survey. But like the way you ask the survey question matters. Like if you say, are you willing to pay like, $10 more a month in taxes to pay for the Green New Deal? Like the support for it goes like below 30%. Whereas if you ask like, do you support the Green New Deal? So like in any case, the point is like citizens are totally incoherent. So like people are often, they have allegiance to a party because it's their team, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's the same as what their policy preferences are. In fact, usually the two are unrelated, and people will vote for a party and have very little knowledge of what the policy like preferences of the parties they're supporting are.
Yeah, the policy specific thing is good because I know that even here in Canada, I don't usually know half of the platforms that for the politicians that I'm voting for, and B, most of them aren't even fucking clear about what they're going to do when they get into office until they just
Yeah.
do the Napoleon thing and they just dive in and then think from there, right? Nobody, like, maybe our Green Party or our NDP will put on like a fully worked out platform that you can go through and look at each thing individually. But our main parties, the Libs and the Conserves, they don't do shit. They put out like some vague promises, half of which they don't follow afterwards. And it's the same thing. Yeah, for policy preference, it's silly. There shouldn't be a correlation. And I'm glad to hear there is barely one.
Yeah.
And it's just people, you know, so it's like, yeah, it's like special interest money and then a bunch of fucking clueless citizens who have incoherent views, who don't know anything in the middle, who are being hypnotized by the spectacle of it all, and cultural concerns, right? I think people are much more aware of like what their cultural membership and their identity membership is. That seems to be much more important to people.
Yeah.
And that's really what
self-imposed
the polarization is. The
immaturity
polarization is
indeed.
cultural. It's cultural polarization and membership polarization, but like, you know, economic and like policy preference, like people are fucking clueless about that shit. Like they don't know.
I'll give you a sexy spectacle quotation from De Boer. Politics will eventually be replaced by imagery. He writes this in the 60s or whenever this was written. The politician will be too happy to abdicate in favor of his image, or we could include party, because the image/party will be much more powerful than he could ever be. It's working. It's doing what it should.
I just wanted to say there's a really funny thing. There's a comment I wanted to make about the economic issue, and then I also want to make a Simpsons reference. Actually, I'll go with the Simpsons reference first, because what I always use to explain this to my students when talking about the incoherence of people's views is, you might remember there was that episode where the teachers go on strike because they're not getting paid enough. And they all meet in front of the parents, and Krabappel gives this big long speech. She's like, don't you want to give your children a good education? And all the parents are like, yeah, the children are the future. And Skinner goes up and he's like, yeah, but to do it, we'd have to raise taxes. And then all the parents are like, oh, the taxes, we can't put up with that. And then she's like, come on. And they're like, oh yeah, kids, the future. And he like does that little motion with his hand about money. And they're like, oh yeah, that hand thing means the taxes and stuff, right? This is really how it is that voters actually tend to approach a lot of issues. If you offer them the option of supporting left-wing programs without attaching it to any kind of cost, they'll usually say yes, right? Because who doesn't want more public services, right? For the most part.
Yeah, if you don't attach it to any cost, and also if you don't attach any like cultural meaning
exactly.
to it, right? So if you just ask them something really specific without saying whether it's like left wing or whatever, like, yeah, exactly. You can get like a really conservative person to be like, yeah, like I want that, like I want, and then but if you're like, oh, it's like socialized medicine, then they're like, no, I don't.
Yeah,
want
exactly.
that.
You can even use vague rhetoric, right? Do you think
fucking...
the government should be more compassionate towards those who need it, right? And a lot of people will think like, well, I believe in compassion, so yes, check, and all of a sudden you sound like a DSA, right? But like on the economic point, I mean, this is one of the things that I actually think attests to what you see with Trumpism, which is important, because there have been a number of different studies done in political psychology to assess whether Marx was actually right. People feel a sense of class consciousness. And it turned out that the best empirical evidence we have right now is that he was half right. Unlike what a lot of neoliberal economists claimed, people don't just make evaluations about how well they're doing by comparing themselves to themselves, right? I don't just ask myself, am I doing better today than I was yesterday, which was kind of the Thatcher question in the 1980s, right? I will actually ask, how am I doing relative to other people, right? The problem is that we don't tend to ask, how is the working class doing relative to the capitalist class? Or how is Joe the plumber doing next to Jeff Bezos? Or I guess Elon Musk will be the new poster boy for just incomparable graft. I ask myself, how am I, Joe the plumber, doing next to Professor so-and-so whose toilet I repair, right? We make interpersonal comparisons to the person who's above us immediately, right? And this is extremely problematic since it means it's very difficult to actually mobilize people against ruling elites, because the elites can say, well, no, the people that you're angry at aren't us. You shouldn't be pissed off at, the capitalist class. You should be angry at the doctors, the lawyers, the educators, the bureaucrats, all these undeserving people who think they're better than you, who live in a nicer neighborhood than you, and who are able to send their kids to cool colleges when you have to settle for a community college or state level college or whatever it happens to be, right? And it's really effective because those are the people that we tend to compare ourselves to mentally, right? And I think that there's a lot of common sense to back this up, right? I don't typically sit there thinking to myself, geez, I wonder, I'm so pissed off that that judge on the Supreme Court is making $250,000. I should be making that. I sit there and I think I should have a tenured position, or that PhD student who got a scholarship, his work isn't much better than mine. I should have a scholarship, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
right?
I mean, I agree. I was thinking about how this human tendency to compare ourselves to others. I'm just noticing a lot of like the right wing reaction to what happened at the Capitol, right, is immediately doing what we call whataboutism, but I think it like speaks to a similar thing, which is just like comparing. It's like, okay, like my people did this, but like what about Antifa and BLM and stuff? And it's always thinking about like what is being culturally legitimized on my team and what is being culturally condemned on the other team, and what's the balance and what's the material difference. I mean, I'm seeing that talking point all over right wing Twitter.
I think it's a problem because that pisses me off, because I'm like, look, you might be able to condemn some of the violence that was committed during the protests during the summer, but there's no doubt that they were motivated by something that's a genuine concern, right? Which is the murder of an innocent person by a police officer, right? Whereas this was motivated by a desire to overturn a democratic election to make sure that their own guy would get in office. So
you can be more sympathetic than that.
I'm not. I'm actually less sympathetic than I'm portraying myself here.
Well, deep state pedophiles are trying to kick out your guy and put in a zombie animated corpse guy who represents the establishment and has his entire life.
Yeah.
If those were the stakes, I'd probably get a cow hat on too.
Yeah,
that's true. Yeah.
I mean, whenever you think about the reality of what happened, that picture, that image of all those dudes inside of the Capitol and that guy with the horn, the QAnon dude, is gonna be in one of those like 100 years of photography books right next to the Vietnamese carpet bombing pictures and the moon landing pictures, and that's gonna be in there. And now QAnon is going to be like just fixed in the American historical memory for the next century because of that fucking barbarian from Diablo 2 come to life.
Yeah, you'll be flipping through your fucking history book, and there'll be like the two towers falling down. There'll be like Bush with like the mission accomplished thing, and then there'll be that dude with the horns.
And the Q sent me the professional BLM counter protesters.
Honestly, I'm mostly jealous of QAnon with the fact that they've just been able to develop and nurture and have so much buy-in to an entire cosmology of the world that is completely divorced from reality. I mean, we can thank Facebook for it in part, as Eric and I discussed on a Patreon podcast yesterday.
Yeah, it's the condition of their possibility.
But I'm jealous. Where are our myth makers?
That's the thing. The news, that's like, this was Walter Benjamin's point in The Storyteller with our hyper-connected world. What I was saying earlier, instant explanation, right? Nothing has time to become a story. Nothing has time to be mythologized. It's all explained immediately. And that takes away, that you lose something in your culture. Maybe this is a bit of an older view now, but you do lose something when you can't tell stories. Like I said, we'd all be hearing about this as it comes through the proper media channels and is filtered in various ways. But we get sort of raw, unfiltered imagery. And in a way, that's like more confusing and even worse than at least we have professional news people organizing it for us and putting together the narratives for us. And in the meantime, we can sort of mythologize and speculate. And then when we get the full story, those things come together and it creates something bigger. But today we just get whatever your echo chamber wants to say, whether it's, and most of those time, those echo chambers are filled with Twitter robots and what do you call that shit? Copy pasta, where someone immediately just makes all these posts about things. Like I think I'm seeing one now about the BLM protests, because people will make the points. People will make all these points. Someone will anticipate it and make a copy pasta, and then it goes through the echo chambers and everyone just copy paste. And that's arguments today, is whataboutism and copy pasta. That's what our online discourse is at right now. It's a very good, it's straight out of Ivy League level of debate there.
We are being turned into algorithmic subjects.
I just want to finish this up because this is actually about QAnon. It was really funny because I was looking into a little bit about how he sends them messages. And I was kind of thinking to myself that in some ways this is really appealing because many of us sometimes feel a sense of existential dread at like the meaninglessness of existence, but these QAnon people really have an almost like excessively meaningful world. And probably the preeminent example of this is there was this picture of Trump with a bunch of other senior Republicans, and they were all giving a thumbs up to something. And one of the symbols that these people interpreted as being from QAnon was the fact that if you draw a circle around their thumbs and draw a line between one thumb and another, it looks like a giant Q. And this was taken to be a sign that all these Republicans are into it, and they're sending a message to their supporters that they're all part of the conspiracy, right?
Yeah.
It's fitting that he wears then that bull headdress because it's a completely totemic religion.
He probably drinks loads of NyQuil too all the time. Giant fucking Q there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, can I just make a point about the protests? So I think one point I was thinking about yesterday is I think on a previous podcast we talked about the like use of violence or rioting, the legitimacy of rioting, and I think I might have said at the time, that I have less of a problem with people destroying government property versus people's private property, right? Like just destroying some random person's small business or something. So like to some extent, I think like yesterday, it's like if you're going to riot or something, even though I totally obviously disagreed with the message, it's like the fact that they're rioting and like a symbol of, that's a government institution. It's a, like, that seems like a more legitimate target to me.
Yeah.
They did a good job. People are we're talking about it.
It's symbolic.
And it's public property.
They didn't kill anybody.
Well, yeah, they didn't kill anybody themselves, right? Like, so I would be like, I would say I'm more supportive of destruction of property when it's public property versus.
I will also
private
say
property.
that there was kind of an amusing element to this where apparently Ted Cruz and a couple of the other like mega far right Trumpists were amongst the first people to evacuate. And I read an article where it was like, it's kind of amusing that they weren't willing to sit there and just deal with the monster that they created or helped create as it like stormed into their fucking headquarters and all of its glory. And fucking, I can just imagine Ted Cruz with his Ivy League education looking at the guy with the fucking moose helmet being like, that's your man, Teddy. That's your dude. Yeah.
I'm your number one fan.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting that we never took seriously all the incitement when it was just in words, but now that it's cropped up in images and video, now we're all like stunned that it really happened. So we still kind of culturally draw a really hard line between words and images. Words can be deceptive and kind of meaningless, but for some reason images are traumatic and shocking, and somehow that's where we draw the line. Now we're all outraged. We're not outraged by the telling of people, the incitement of a riot. We're enraged when the riot actually happens. It's self-defeating.
Well, it's funny you say that because I think I'm assuming you're thinking about like these politicians who are now all of a sudden like outraged by what happens, even though they've been like letting this incitement happen.
Yeah, the outrage and
I think
the
the reason for that is because I think politicians are often thinking very narrow-mindedly about their own like interests to be reelected. So like they are making very, very situational calculations about how they should react to something. And they're thinking about voters. So I think like oftentimes they let these things slide and weren't thinking about like the broader implications of what they were sort of like morally legitimizing or authorizing, and more just thinking, well, I really don't want to piss off this base. This base is really energized. I need to make sure that I'm in their good books. I need to make sure that, they don't like turn on me. It's very narrow calculus.
Like Cruz was making these, I don't know, like half gestures, sort of like endorsing or stoking before all this happened. Canadian, by the way, we're not sending our best at all.
I feel like you made that joke before on this podcast.
I think I made it with respect to that Lauren Southern. Is she Canadian?
Yeah, she is.
I made it with respect to her. So we
She's
still have a
actually
few.
from BC, so congratulations.
We're not sending her best.
We have a few more awful people to go through that we've sent down there, but at least we got rid of them. But anyway, they hate
Gavin
and will
McInnes.
never love Cruz because they can smell that on him. They can smell this political maneuvering on him in a way that Trump is too narcissistic and too filled with his own ego or his own lack of ego that he's trying to fill in
too
there.
genuine.
So then they're never going to love him. And this is kind of why my theory of this is that it's a pseudo event, is that there's nobody with that gravitas, that desire that Trump has, that could fill that place. Like even when Don Jr. does it, tries to incite the yokels, he's totally transparently try hard about it. And the thing that Trump doesn't have is the ability to look like he's trying hard, because it embodies his entire being to sort of act this way.
It's so true.
So who can keep Trump going, or who can keep Trumpism going? Who can keep the bullhead guy going after he's gone? And unless he starts doing it from the sidelines and goes to a media outlet. But there's no one. Yeah, I'm wondering.
I think the most likely candidate for that is somebody from like cable news. So like a Tucker Carlson, or like one of these people who's already part of like the hyper real, like whatever these, Baudrillardian terms you like to use, like part of that like ecosystem. That's going to have like, I agree with you. It can't be one of these conventional politicians, no matter how much they supported Trump. They just don't embody the rhetoric. But, a Hannity, a Sean Hannity, a Tucker Carlson, one of these people, I could imagine them coming in and being scarier, because they're at least Tucker Carlson, I think, is probably
I'm going to actually
smart.
make a prophecy right here, and I want you guys to note it, because when I'm proven right in 10 years, we're going to look back on this, and I'm going to just masturbate with self-confident person.
Another prediction. But I predicted there was going to be another Oklahoma.
First, they went for a movie star with Reagan. Then they went reality TV star with Trump. The only place to go is porn star next. So I think that's ultimately what we're going to see.
It's a hot prediction. I like it. I'm gonna say it's gonna be Kanye trying to win back Kim. He's gonna do this grand romantic gesture. He's gonna run for president and be like, "This one's for you. Take me back, please." And he's gonna try and do it to impress her.
He could have crossed the aisle support.
Yeah.
Or it could be a YouTuber.
Oh God.
To me,
President
actually,
Jake
YouTuber.
Paul would
a YouTuber.
be frightening. Or President
PewDiePie.
PewDiePie.
A YouTube could be a YouTuber.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be one, or it could be
The
one of
boomers
these.
would have to die before that happens.
He's not American though. No, but one of these like American right wing like YouTube commentators, honestly, like in response to Matt joking about a porn star, but I feel like equally absurd, but probably much more likely, one of these fucking weird right wing YouTubers has a shot.
Could you even imagine like a fucking President Dave Rubin? What would that be like?
Oh my God, he's a
thought
grifter
that
and a half, though.
You thought Donald Trump was fucking dumb. You'd sit there and be like, Dave would be like, well, what city am I again? You're in the White House. Don't worry about it.
President Tim Pool.
Oh, okay, good. What? Yeah. Yeah. It would be fucked up.
These fucking grifters, man. I swear. I don't know. It would have to be somebody who's. That's the thing, though. Like, the problem is that there's a lot of these people are grifters. It would have to be one who really believes like the way that Trump believes.
Yeah. I stand by my porn star prediction, though. I think that there's a teleology to history here. And the natural evolution of the moral majority types is that eventually they're going to sell their soul so hard that they're going to bring in somebody who used to get banged hard
I don't mean to
run for president.
I don't mean to beat the old dead horse, but I think we're all going to come together when the real impacts of climate change in 50 years start to come there. That's going to be the external enemy that finally unites us all. And of course, it'll be far too late by then, but we're all going to be fucking saints in 50, 60 years. We're all going to be saints.
You don't think it's just gonna lead to what's it called, like an apocalyptic?
No, it'll be like a 9/11 effect, except like over many, many years, is everyone's just gonna come together against the external enemy. Except the external enemy is going to be, well, ourselves, but also the 100 industries that have done this to the world and various other things.
Or we'll end up like Mad Max.
No, it won't be. Well, it'll be Mad Max afterwards, but leading up to them, like after it's too late, but we're all trying to stop it. That's when that's going to be the best time, because we're all going to come together. The political binaries will be abolished because we'll all be Green Party. And then, but it'll be too late, of course, by then, barring some amazing technology being invented that can scrub loads of carbon out of the atmosphere.
They politicized a virus, though, dude. I don't have much hope.
Who did?
The Republicans.
That is true.
Maybe not the the Qs.
But the virus is doing the exact opposite. With the virus, we're all stuck where we are. with climate change, we're going to see millions and millions of refugees pouring in from on the coasts and from all over the place. And it's going to be a very different problem. I mean, at first it's going to be rough, as we have seen the refugee crisis. That's like on the back burner now, apparently. We haven't heard much about that. But once that starts back up again, we're going to be going through some shit. And then finally, we're all going to come together because nobody's denying climate change anymore. This isn't the 2010s, for fuck's sake. Nobody's denying climate change anymore. So we're all going to come together over it. Today, we can argue about what caused what.
I hope so.
Who did that and whose fault's this, but...
We can argue about jerk off about the cultural war and
exactly.
transgender bathrooms and nonsense.
Well, while we're making predictions, I predict that Q becomes a fully fledged state religion in the conservative ethno state in what is now centered in what is now Florida.
The Q party.
Which at the same time goes underwater, and then there is a great war between the northern United States and the Q state.
Do you think there's a chance that there could be a third party like emerge in the States in reaction to this, like a MAGA party or something that's going to totally split the conservative vote? I mean, I hope so. That'd be good for the Democrats.
Strategically, there's just no reason, it seems.
It is possible. I am genuinely... I thought today that what might very well happen is that the Republicans might try to find some way to actually just outright exclude Trump from being able to run for office. Because he's made a lot of political enemies.
Well, that's actually
if that
why.
actually happens...
Well, that's actually why
exactly.
I think there's a chance that they could impeach Trump after he leaves office, right? Because if they impeach him after he leaves, that means he can't legally be president again.
Oh, yeah, but it won't keep him from campaigning to be president, even if that's the law, right?
But you're right. I think like that's why the Republicans might actually support impeachment, because they might just not want to let Trump be president again.
Yeah, exactly. But in that case, it would shock me if he didn't decide to create, if not a party, at least some kind of movement that's centered around himself.
Well, exactly. That's why I'm thinking
disciples.
maybe there'd be a chance for a MAGA party or something, or like, a Q party or something crazy.
Yeah. I mean, that'd be fun. They could just finally get rid of like even the vestige of respectability. Just have dancing girls appear when like fucking Trump is like going up on office.
That would
fucking
be fun.
like just tank drive through things.
Oh my God. I needed some catharsis after yesterday, and so I watched the movie Idiocracy.
Oh, yeah. That's always a good one.
Yeah.
I wish it wasn't a prophetic book or prophetic film.
Yeah. Yeah, that one's prophetic as fuck.
Yeah, well, Matt Stone and Trey Parker were geniuses of a certain sort.
Oh,
that was Mike Judge, actually.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
Fuck yeah. No, I was thinking
Also a
of what
genius.
was their thing? Basketball. Yeah, that was the one. My bad.
Shit.
Anyway, I feel cathartized, which is sort of the purpose of participating in the spectacle in the way we do. We've had our small
We've achieved
headbutts and
catharsis.
reviewed the events of the day.
Yeah, God, as a political junkie, it was fucking impossible for me to get any work done yesterday. Like I was trying, and I was
Yeah.
just obsessively watching the news. Like it's.
I know. I was getting messages from all kinds of people being like, "You've seen this shit. What the fuck's going on? Look at this. Isn't it fucked up?" And I was like, "Yeah."
Eric and I recorded an episode on cybernetics that had absolute. I guess we brought it in. Shit.
A little bit.
I just tried to stay off Twitter.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
sensible.
what's the lesson here? I think we should start holding politicians a little more accountable for the shit they say, but also make sure that we hold them accountable for evasive and non-answery kind of bullshit that was kind of the standard in the past, and now it's kind of just you can say anything and it doesn't matter because it's Trump.
And you can pre-record a video and pretend that you're in Canada when you're in Cancun.
Yeah, exactly.
Those are the real disgusting people. I agree.
Non-answers, not cool, and incitement to riot, also not cool. Should be automatic punishment for that, but
I think the solution has been staring us in the face for a very long time. We just need Justin Trudeau to invade the United States, annex the northern parts of it, create an eco-socialist paradise with himself as permanent leader.
Yeah.
And then that will at least take care of North America. We could even get Mexico on board. I mean, AMLO's there right now. And just create kind of like a United North American Federation that only excludes the American South.
and
We could give them
Turn
Alberta
that
too
into
if they want it.
Mountain.
yeah, they can take it.
Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, they can slice that.
Yeah, they can build a castle.
No
in the
offense
tar
to any
sands.
people from Alberta who are listening.
Yeah.
No, I'm just saying. I was just thinking about how that would kind of be difficult. That would be a wrench in our plan of creating an eco-socialist utopia. I feel like the Albertans wouldn't be particularly excited about that.
Yeah, I mean, we can just create like it'd be almost like a state in the state because we'll carve off like the coast down through Georgia into Florida, do like a little exemption down there, and then they can just have like the Midwest from like Louisiana, Texas up there, like a big giant kidney.
Then we can all get
it'll be a
back to
paradise.
saving the world, one fair trade organic bean Starbucks coffee at a time.
Well, it's kind of funny you say that though, Matt, because a lot of like the post-liberal like theory right now, they do often talk about the need for more pluralism of or more localism, right? More insular cultures,
more bottom up.
And I did notice like after like the Democrats won the Senate, they were like, I saw a lot of discussion of, you know, maybe we need to secede, you know, secession stuff, and like maybe if that things keep going that way, it could be a real possibility.
Yeah, the Albertan separatists said the same thing when Trudeau won. It's like, all right,
Yeah, that's true.
we're gonna get out of here. We have no access to. We're an oil economy with no access to a port, but we're just gonna leave. Bye.
Yeah.
That was more funny for exactly that reason. I remember McLean's did an interview with the head of the Alberta Separatist Party and brought that exact thing up, and they were like, well, I'm not sure it'll be a problem. You know, we'll find a way to negotiate and get a better deal than we have right now. And they were like, what better deal could you have than being part of the country, you know, where you're trying to get, you know, move your oil to the coast. And it's like, well, we'll sort that out afterwards. It's like, I don't know. I really think you should have a solution to that now, since this is really the whole reason you want separatism.
Yeah, that's a little Brexit-y, a little bit of a Brexit-like oversight there. Yeah, I agree with the more communal, I don't know about insular, but definitely communal, you know, face down, bottom up. That's the way I like my politics to be conducted.
All right, listeners, we hope that you have taken this train of intensified emotion and then catharsis, and now we are all chill. Now we can continue to do whatever it is we've been doing, mostly nothing. So thank you all for being a part of our climax, and then, you know, the cigarette after.
Yeah, the denouement.
Yeah, why don't we just sign off from the Pill Pod? This is Pills, Matt, Eric, Victor, and what am I saying, man?
Thank you.
Bear with us.
Woo!